In the intricate dance of international relations, sanctions are a tool used to exert pressure and influence behavior. They are often seen as a non-violent means to achieve political and economic objectives without resorting to military action. The use of sanctions can be traced back to ancient times, but in the modern era, they have become a sophisticated instrument of diplomacy. They represent a form of economic and political punishment imposed on a nation by another country or a group of countries. These measures can range from trade restrictions to financial penalties, and they are designed to create economic hardship and political isolation for the targeted nation. The goal is to compel the targeted government to change its behavior in a way that aligns with the interests of the imposing countries. Sanctions can target specific sectors of an economy or individuals within a government. For example, they might focus on critical industries such as oil and gas, banking or technology. By disrupting these key sectors, the imposing countries hope to weaken the targeted nation's economy and force political concessions. Additionally, sanctions can be aimed at influential individuals, freezing their assets and restricting their travel to apply personal pressure. The aim is often to change a country's policies or actions that are deemed unacceptable by the international community. This can include a wide range of issues, from human rights abuses to military aggression. The international community, through organizations like the United Nations, often plays a crucial role in coordinating and enforcing sanctions to ensure they are effective and have the desired impact. From arms embargoes to financial restrictions, sanctions come in various forms, each carrying its own set of intended consequences. Arms embargoes prevent the sale of weapons to the targeted nation, aiming to reduce its military capabilities. Financial restrictions can include freezing assets, banning transactions, and limiting access to international financial systems, which can cripple the targeted nation's economy. Sanctions are a powerful instrument of foreign policy. They allow countries to exert influence without direct confrontation, making them a preferred tool in the diplomatic arsenal. However, the decision to impose sanctions is not taken lightly, as it requires careful consideration of the potential economic and political repercussions. They are often used in response to threats to international peace and security. When a nation engages in activities that threaten global stability, such as developing nuclear weapons or supporting terrorism, sanctions are a way to signal international disapproval and to attempt to curb these dangerous behaviors. These threats can include human rights violations, acts of aggression, and the pursuit of weapons of mass destruction. Sanctions serve as a deterrent, warning other nations of the consequences of such actions. They also provide a means for the international community to stand in solidarity against violations of international norms and laws. The effectiveness of sanctions, however, is a subject of ongoing debate. While some argue that sanctions can bring about significant political change, others believe they often fail to achieve their objectives. The success of sanctions depends on various factors, including the level of international support, the resilience of the targeted nation, and the ability to enforce the measures effectively. Critics argue that they can harm ordinary citizens and may not always achieve their intended political goals. The economic hardship caused by sanctions can lead to shortages of essential goods, increased poverty, and social unrest. In some cases, the targeted government may use the sanctions as a rallying point to strengthen its domestic support, further entrenching its position. Despite the controversies, sanctions remain a frequently used tool in international relations. They're seen as a way to apply pressure without resorting to military force, and they can be adjusted or lifted as circumstances change. The flexibility of sanctions makes them an attractive option for policymakers seeking to influence international behavior. They reflect the complexities of a globalized world where economic interdependence and political tensions often collide. In an interconnected global economy, the impact of sanctions can ripple across borders, affecting not only the targeted nation but also its trading partners and allies. This interconnectedness requires careful consideration of the broader implications of sanctions. The cases of North Korea, Iran, Syria, and Russia offer stark examples of the impact of sanctions on nations and their people. Each of these countries has faced significant economic and political challenges as a result of international sanctions. The long-term effects on their economies, political systems and societies provide valuable insights into the strengths and limitations of sanctions as a policy tool. They provide valuable insights into the effectiveness and limitations of this controversial foreign policy tool. By studying these cases, policymakers can learn important lessons about the conditions under which sanctions are most likely to succeed and the potential unintended consequences that must be managed. As the world continues to grapple with complex international challenges, sanctions will remain a key component of the global diplomatic toolkit. North Korea has been subjected to international sanctions for decades. These sanctions have been a constant in the country's history, shaping its interactions with the rest of the world and influencing its domestic policies. These sanctions are primarily a response to the country's pursuit of nuclear weapons and its human rights record. The international community has repeatedly called for North Korea to abandon its nuclear ambitions, but the regime has remained steadfast in its goals. The international community views North Korea's nuclear program as a threat to regional and global security. The potential for conflict in the Korean peninsula has led to heightened military readiness among neighboring countries and their allies. The country's human rights abuses, documented by the United Nations, have also drawn widespread condemnation. Reports of political prison camps, forced labor, and severe restrictions on freedom have painted a grim picture of life under the regime. The sanctions imposed on North Korea have severely restricted its access to global trade and finance. This isolation has made it difficult for the country to engage in international commerce, further straining its economy. They have targeted key industries such as mining, which is a significant source of revenue for the regime, energy, which is crucial for the country's development, and textiles, a major export product. The impact on the North Korean economy has been significant, hindering its ability to generate revenue and provide for its citizens. The scarcity of goods in markets and the lack of economic opportunities have left many North Koreans struggling to make ends meet. Despite facing severe economic hardship, North Korea has remained defiant. The regime continues to prioritize its military and nuclear programs, often at the expense of the well-being of its people. The sanctions have taken a toll on the daily lives of ordinary North Koreans. In rural areas, families often rely on subsistence farming to survive, while in urban centers, the lack of resources is acutely felt. Access to basic necessities, including food and medicine, is limited. Rationing is a common practice, and many North Koreans face chronic shortages of essential supplies. The country's healthcare system is struggling to cope with the lack of resources. Hospitals and clinics often lack the necessary equipment and medications to treat patients effectively. The international community continues to grapple with the challenge of balancing pressure on the North Korean regime with the humanitarian needs of its people. Efforts to provide aid are often complicated by the regime's restrictions and the ongoing political tensions. Despite these challenges, the resilience and spirit of the North Korean people shine through. Cultural traditions and community bonds remain strong, offering a glimpse of hope amidst the hardships. As the world continues to navigate the complexities of the North Korean issue, the stories of those who have escaped and the ongoing diplomatic efforts remind us of the potential for change and the enduring hope for a better future. Iran has been under international sanctions for much of the past few decades. These sanctions are primarily related to its nuclear program and its support for regional proxies. The international community has expressed concerns that Iran's nuclear program could be used to develop nuclear weapons. Iran maintains that its nuclear program is for peaceful purposes. The sanctions have had a significant impact on Iran's economy. They have targeted key sectors such as oil and gas, banking and shipping. The Iranian rial has plummeted in value, leading to soaring inflation and eroding purchasing power. Unemployment has risen, and many Iranians are struggling to make ends meet. The sanctions have also limited Iran's access to foreign investment. Despite the economic challenges, Iran has continued to assert its influence in the region. It has supported allies in Syria, Iraq and Yemen, The sanctions have complicated Iran's relations with the West, but they have also pushed the country to strengthen ties with other powers, such as China and Russia. The future of Iran's nuclear program and the impact of sanctions remain uncertain. Syria has been embroiled in a devastating civil war for over a decade. The conflict began in 2011, stemming from widespread protests against the government, which quickly escalated into a full-scale war involving multiple factions and foreign powers. The conflict has resulted in a catastrophic humanitarian crisis, with millions displaced and in need of assistance. Refugee camps are overflowing, and many families have been torn apart, struggling to find safety and basic necessities. International sanctions imposed on the Syrian government and its allies have added another layer of complexity to the situation. These sanctions target key sectors of the economy, aiming to cut off resources that could be used to fuel the conflict. These sanctions are primarily aimed at pressuring the Syrian government to end the violence and engage in a political solution. Diplomatic efforts have been ongoing, with numerous peace talks and negotiations taking place over the years, yet a lasting resolution remains elusive. The sanctions have exacerbated the already dire economic situation in Syria. Markets are empty, shops are closed, and the local currency has plummeted in value, making everyday life a struggle for the average Syrian. They have restricted access to essential goods and services, including food, medicine, and fuel. Pharmacies often have empty shelves, and food scarcity is a daily challenge for many families. Long lines for fuel have become a common sight, further highlighting the dire situation. The Syrian pound has collapsed, leading to hyperinflation and making it difficult for ordinary Syrians to afford basic necessities. Prices for everyday items have skyrocketed, and many people are struggling to make ends meet. The sanctions have also hampered efforts to rebuild the country's shattered infrastructure. Roads, schools and hospitals lie in ruins, and reconstruction projects are often stalled due to lack of funding and resources. The humanitarian situation in Syria remains dire, with millions facing food insecurity, displacement and lack of access to healthcare. Children are particularly vulnerable, with many suffering from malnutrition and limited access to education and medical care. The international community is divided on the effectiveness of sanctions in resolving the Syrian conflict. While some nations advocate for continued pressure on the Syrian government, others argue that the sanctions are only worsening the humanitarian crisis. While some argue that sanctions are necessary to pressure the Syrian government, others contend that they are counterproductive and harm the civilian population. The debate continues, with no clear consensus on the best path forward to achieve peace and stability in Syria. International aid organizations are working tirelessly to provide relief, but the scale of the crisis is overwhelming. The global response has been significant, yet the needs of the Syrian people continue to outpace the aid provided. The world watches, hoping for a resolution that will bring an end to the suffering and pave the way for a brighter future for Syria.